Alright guys, welcome back to another video slash devlog slash tutorial. Um, so on this video I'm going to show you a pretty cool feature that Unreal also provides us, and that is super important for any developer to start looking at it as soon as they need to display something into the UI to the player itself. The sooner you do this, uh, the last work you're going to need to do as you evolve with your project, which is basically a localizer project. So whenever you're creating your game, part of the creating the strategy of it is which country or which language do I will provide support for it. So usually you're gonna create the first, usually is English, depending on the country you are, probably it's gonna be, I don't know, Japanese or Chinese or something like that, Spanish. I mean, but what's going to be the main language of your project itself? Usually is English, but you might want to provide support for other sorts of players as well. For example, if you're going to provide your game to someone else outside of the US or outside of UK or Australia or Canada, those countries that speak English, the player might not be comfortable with English while playing, so you may need to provide support for other sorts of languages. Like if you're gonna launch your game for Brazil, you might need to promote or support Brazilian Portuguese. If you're gonna go to Portugal, you may need to support Portugal Portuguese. If you go to Spanish, uh, you know, countries like LATAM, you're probably gonna need to support Latin American Spanish as one of your languages, and etc. 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 Unreal already provides something to us, which is the localization system. I'm going to leave a link into the description below of a blog post that is completely detailed on how to use it. And there's actually even at the bottom of it, of that post as well, a video from the actual Epic Games into the Unreal Engine channel explaining into all sorts of details, at least on the blueprint level, how to use the localization system. The thing that I'm gonna show you here is how I used in my project for that inventory UI that I've been building and the project itself that I'm building so far, and how do I actually make those assessment through C++ as well, so I can inject some translations into my actual code in C++. So let's get right into it. So if you go to the game itself, first of all, whenever you're playing around with localization system, you need to play your game as a standalone. Otherwise, it's simply not going to work. It's going to change the language of your editor, not your project. So let's play this as a standalone game. So now that we are playing as a standalone, if I open my inventory, for example, you can see that it's showing in Portuguese because my localization is saying to show in Portuguese. If I open the console command and change the culture to English US, I think I don't remember if it's underscore or if it's just that way. But let me try this way. Okay, so just the without the underscore, it works. So as you see, I changed to English. Now my UI is all localized to English. If I do the same, but for Spanish, Latin America Spanish, which is the code is Spanish ES 419, you see that now I have my UI in Spanish. So you need to work that one and since the beginning. And that's something that you can do this throughout the Unreal Localization System. So let me just open up this and change the culture back to English US. There we go. So, but how do I actually achieve this one? So, first of all, if you go to the Localization System dashboard, so if you open the window, Localization dashboard, you need to specify a couple things. So one of them is which the target that you're gonna, actually modify or apply localizations for. Usually you select the game, which is basically the default, which is your project. But if you have like DLCs or expansion passes or something like that, extra content, you may need to, specify different translations for if your game is already, launched into a single language and you want to provide maybe a DLC or a translation later on, you can just add a new target, like, and call it, I don't know, expansion pass or something like that, and that should work. If you're gonna work with the localization service provider, you might need to connect here, but that's not what we're gonna do right now. You need to specify the name of the target. So as you can see, it came by default with the game. You can change that if you wanted to, but I mean, I won't do it. I mean, I'm in the beginning of my project, so I'm okay on leaving that game because at least it tells me that I'm localizing my main game, not my DLC or something like that. Uh, the loading policy is when you're gonna load those translations. In my case, I want to load it anytime that I actually open my game. So whenever I open my game, or if I wanted to do it into the editor or proper names, etc. But I'm gonna do only when I do launch my game, which is a standalone game. Uh, you can gather the translations for source files like text file like CSVs and etc. But or even C++ if you wanted to, which is not something that I usually do because there's a lot of C++ classes. They may grab a lot of garbage here that is not necessarily needed to be translated. So what I usually do, it goes for this getter from packages, and then I specify a couple paths. So what do I want to translate in my game? In this case, I usually want to translate the UI, so you can specify, go here to, type, you can leave it to do auto, and then you can click on the choose directory and specify where you want to look for translations or file that needs translations into your game. In my case, I have my translation that I wanted to is under the UI folder character string table, and I have a string table inside of that. So if I go to my UI folder, character string table, I have this string table. I'm gonna get into this a little bit, I'm gonna get to it, but I want to translate this file only, basically. So, but if I want to translate all files, like localize everything into the UI, I can just, leave it under the UI level and select that folder here. It's in Portuguese in my sense because my Windows is in Portuguese, but you can always select the folder itself and just leave it at that way. And you're gonna grab all the text that it is into those folders. It's gonna go throughout the folder into all of the files in it, and it's gonna search for text variables in it. And if it finds it, it's gonna look for you and ask you for translations later on. I'm gonna do this as well for the inventory items, so my items can be translated as well. So my item names, if I want to translate the descriptions, and etc. And the extensions I leave by the default, which is basically if I want to translate a map or a U asset, which is basically like any asset into the UE4, any U object, which is basically blueprints or I don't know, anything else that you created, usually a U asset inside of the engine. And that should be about it that I need to do under here. After selecting where is the items that you're gonna want to translate, you want to also specify what is the culture that you're gonna leave as by the default culture of your game. Culture is basically language, so usually it comes with the English, but is not set to the native culture, which is basically saying like I have English support, but that's not my native culture. So you may need to click into the English button, like radio button here, and it's gonna pop up like this can't be undone. Like, so you can see like it can that's gonna pop up. So this actually cannot be undone, and now translated will be permanently lost. So if I do that, all my translations for English that I already did, they're gonna be lost, which is not what I wanted to. So in the first time, just let English or add a new culture to whatever your main game language is. Like maybe it's Japanese, maybe it's Ukrainian or something like that that requires a different alphabet. But just keep in mind though that select that first before even start translating. Select the native culture before start translated. Once you do that, do not change it because you're gonna lose all translations you already did at that point, or you may lose part of those translations, at least for the native language that you're going to change or something like that. And since translations usually cost money, well, keep in mind to actually be simple in that sense. So usually I set it up my project to be English as the default language since it's the main market that I want to target with, and then I start adding up other targets that I can at least speak, other languages that I can at least speak. Since I'm a developer, I cannot, afford someone else to translate my game. So at least right now, so I specify only the language that I speak right now. So I specify English, Portuguese, Brazil because I'm a Brazilian guy, and I'll also specify Spanish, Latin America because it's from our friends nearby, so I can actually just translate it or get support for someone else around those areas to help me out with the translations. Um, well, that's the first step. Once you add the cultures you want to support and select your native cultures, later on you want to click on this getter text. So what that's actually going to do is just going to go into those folders you specify under the package, try to find whatever strings that you want to translate. And once it finds it, they're going to pop up here as, I don't know, the native culture is going to be all, translated already because once you select or coding or is it specifying the values inside of the string table in a specific language, that's going to be the language that's going to be already translated because since it's the native, doesn't need translations for it because it's already building the game for that language in the first place. But the other ones are going to be empty. So you're going to see that I have around 100% here. But if I select, for example, a different language, let me just go back to, I don't know. Let me just go for a different language like French. Let's suppose I want French from France. So there you go. I added a new language. And if I getter texts right now, what that's gonna do is as you can see, there's 0 strings for me to translate. But once I gather my texts, you'll see that now if I tap on edit translations for it, I'm gonna have a lot of strings to translate. So my back button, my clothing, and etc. And to translate is pretty simple. So I can just translate whatever that means. So let me just go back and see what back actually means. Is in oops, translation.google. So uh, back English. Let me just go to where is it? Where is it? French. There we go. Let's suppose I want to translate this one. So what I can do is then there we go. I translated already. And that's already saved, so you don't need to do anything else. So if you go back now to that localization dashboard and get our texts again, you see that I'm gonna have some progress into the translations for my game because I translated already at least one word for the new culture that I added support for. So if I hit OK, as you can see now I have 7% of my translations already done. So if I play the game, supposedly I should see at least the back button should be translated to French. Okay, uh, but not exactly. So once I gather the text, and if I edit now, you can see that the completed word, you can always go back and change the completed word as well. So you don't need to, it's not written in stone, so you can always change if you wanted to. Just go to the completed tab or needs review or something like that. And the untranslated one, you can always translate again. Um, so yeah, that's how you start translating at least the words that it gathers. But another thing that you can see that is once you click on the gather text and the first time you clicked, if your project is not as as well organized, like into string tables or etc., uh, you see that that's gonna show up like numbers and things that you not necessarily want to translate. For example, if you have an UI like a number, like I don't know, 100 health, it's gonna show 100 here, and the translation for 100 is 100. It doesn't matter. It's a numeric, numeric value, so it doesn't actually need translations. Um, so what you want to do this in that sense is whenever you have a value into your UI that you don't want translation for, you need to specify that into the UI level. And that's why I said that you need to start building this as soon as possible. Otherwise, it's just like a massive work and it can be tiresome to, you know, to actually set it up this properly. So I'm gonna go for an UI as an example. So let me just go to character inventory. Let me see an info as an example. So for example, I would like to translate my name and my description for my items, but I don't want to translate like the actual properties itself. So in that sense, I don't want those to popping up there. So what I did is I clicked on that drop down button and under the inline text, I said that this is not localizable. But if I set that to yes, which is basically what's going to be default for you, and I getter text again, so if I getter text, you're going to see that now I'm going to have the number 7 to translate. It doesn't actually make much of a sense. So let me just wait until that's done. Oh, it's not going to show the number 7 because I specified the path to only the string table. So let me just go back to the UI itself, to UI level. So let me just select here. Not this one, let me just go to the character. So, okay, if I get our text now, you see that lots of strings are going to be popping up on the on the screen for me to translate, which is probably what's going to be showing up for you. So if I go to OK, now you can see that I have at least one string more into each one of these translations. And if I open the translations, that's going to be the number 7. And that's not what I want. And that's probably what, oops, that's a bug on the engine. Let me just go open up, oops, wrong one. So that's not what I wanted. So if I click here, set to no, that's not going to be localizable. And that's the same for every, if you're doing blueprints and you have like, I don't know, this node called text. Let me just go to strings. I don't know. Make text. I think that's, yep. So if you have like some sort of node that is dealing with text, you also want to either localize that variable or set to no localizable. So that's not going to be, if you're building like a string that you don't want translations for, just be sure that under your code, you also specify that to either be translator or not. So that's really important for those that are building things in blueprints. And that's why you need to think that before actually start coding everything. Okay, so now that I took that off, if I gather my text again, probably that should be going away. Technically, that should be the case. And there we go. Now that's gone. The 7 is not translatable anymore. Okay, so that's one thing. And if you want to translate, just leave it a yes, and that's gonna be gather here for you to translate for. But still, even if you filter out the values that you don't want to translate, probably it's gonna be a lot of strings still to translate. And some of them might be duplicated ones. So for example, if you open the menu, you may have play, you may have back, you may have equip, or something like that that is used all over the place in your game. Since translations usually cost money to be done, you want to optimize your game to, don't need to pay someone else to translate your word, the same word twice, because they usually charge you for the string, so by string, sorry. Um, so one thing you can do is optimize whatever strings you have in your game. So identify the ones that you see that is they are like default strings. For example, in my menu, usually they are all default strings. For example, the weapon inventory, I'm gonna have clothing, I'm gonna have weapons, I'm gonna have gears all over the place in my game. So I want to translate that word only once. So what I can do is I can use string tables, which is basically what I specify here. So let me just go back and specify my string table folder because I don't want to mess this up. Let me just gather the text again. String tables are nothing else than a helper for you to store translations in it, or at least the keys in it. So if I open the string tables folder into my character string table, you're gonna see that I have like this strings table file here. And you can create one just by going to miscellaneous, and you're probably gonna have a string table somewhere. There we go, string table here. And it's as straightforward as that it seems. So let me just delete this one. I don't care. So what I did on my one, it's gonna be empty at first on your. Let me just create one so you guys can actually see that. So let me just open up the string table. Where is it? Miscellaneous string table. Let me just leave it that one. See, yours are gonna be that way. So the key is basically if you're creating like a database, that's basically the ID. So it has a couple rules. For example, you can actually import that string table from a CSV file or export that into a CSV file if you wanted to. So if I want to export that into a CSV file, I can always, oops, I can always go and store, I don't know, here like strings. And I can always open up that up. So if you open that CSV, you can see that you now have like this key source string, and you can use that one. I've opened on LibreOffice because I mean it's easier to see. But if you open up with any text editor, you're gonna see that it's gonna have like a CSV format, and you can store that somewhere else into your project, and later on just re-import that into your string table. You can always import that CSV into a string table and then reuse that if you wanted to later on. So what I did here is into the string table, you're going to have the key, and the source string is the default value for it. So remember that you need to specify the native culture for your game. If you specify English, so whenever you're adding like a key, let me just go like, I don't know, weapon key or something like that, what's the value for that key? Well, since my game is localized to English, my default value is going to be weapons. So that's what's going to be presented by default if no translations are found for a specific culture that you set that one up. So that's basically the default value. Let me just delete this one. And also there's a couple rules to create those. So you can have spaces, special characters, etc. in it. So if you add, for example, like a key space, and Rio is gonna complain. If you add like a, oh, actually you can have like some special characters, but not space. So yeah, so you need to add up the default or sort of default values that your game is gonna use it. For example, play, quit, back, clothing, crafting. So those are my default strings that I want to translate, and I don't want to translate anything else or something like that. So I want to translate only this. Um, and once you create that under your actual UI widget, you can just go back and remember, as I said, the text you want to specify either if it's localizable or not. Once you specify as a yes, a string table is going to be available for you. So you can always select what string table is yours. In my case, is strings under that specific folder there, and this one is under for the, I'm probably gonna rename that one. So this one is for my items, so I can just rename later like item strings, and this one for inventory string or something like that. And once you do that, you also need to specify what is the key for that value. In my case, it's clothing. So since I said specify clothing, this is what's gonna do. It's gonna look for that file for the key clothing, grab the source string, and it's gonna show it up here. And once we translated that source string through the localization dashboard, which is basically just specifying that path for that string table, so, which is here, like the folder is here, they're going to be popping up here, and I can always translate that clothing to something. So let me just go back to and find whatever clothing means into, yeah, there we go. So let me just translate a couple words here. Okay, so there we go. So let me save that one up. I'm going to go back and gather my strings again. And you'll see that now I'm gonna be more close to my 100% target of translations. So once it gathers, there we go. Now I'm 36% translated in French. Okay, so what that means is it's gonna look for that key over here. And that key, the value, if not anything else is found, it's gonna be the default value. But if the culture itself is a supported one, what's gonna do is it's gonna change that value to um, what I specify under the translation section. So let me just go back and actually show you. So in order to actually to this to work, not only getter text is needed, but you also need to compile those into files that are more performatic inside of the actual game instead of just using those files. It generates like a couple more performatic games files for your game. So once that's compiled, you can always go back and play. And I think that French from France is FR FR. I think that's the main language that we want to support. Let me just go back and try to drag this up because I'm not being able to. So what But you can see now it's playing as in Portuguese because that's my default language under my Windows system. So my Windows is in Portuguese, so that's why it's already detecting that as I'm playing as a standalone game. What's my default culture? Oh, it's Portuguese Brazil. So what's doing is okay. Let me try to figure it out if that's already supported and just bring the translations for that language specifically. But again, you can always change that into your menu. I'm going to show you how to do that in a couple minutes, but let's just go right into it. So let me just change the culture to FR/FR. And as you can see now, not everything is translated because, again, those are not translated under the localization dashboard. So it's grabbing whatever the source value is. So since I haven't translated inventory, skill tree, crafting, and options, those haven't been translated as well. But if you see here, this one is translated to French now. And if I play around, as you can see, those are all translated. So that's a way for you to keep in mind. So translate it, and that should be about it. So, and that's also um, you're gaining, you're not expending a lot of money on translations because you once specify what needs to be translated, what's not, and second, you always can just go back and select the key you want to use for. And if you have anywhere else in your code that you use the word clothing for it, you can just go back and instead of translating or anything of the sort, you can just go back to the localizable yet and select the same key, and it's gonna be automatically translated for whatever that key value is for the culture that the Windows or the system is using at that point. So okay, pretty simple under the blueprint level and etc. And just keep in mind that can be done as well uh, for your code. So whenever you're creating a text, just keep in mind that can be also done here. So if you wanna, I don't know, clothing, there we go. That's the value. So if I play this and actually like on, let me just put that on the construct. Or event construct. Let me just print that out. Print string. Okay. So if I play the game now, once I open that up, the clothing key is going to be translated for me to Portuguese in that sense. Okay, so if I open that up, boom, it's armadura now, which is basically the clothing one that I translated for. Okay, that's a bug that I need to fix later on, but okay. So that's a way of translating. But how about uh, what are the values that I want to translate? They are all text. String values are not translatable or convertible to a string table. So keep in mind that whenever you need to translate something in your code or in your blueprint, it needs to be a text. So save it as a text variable and it should be fine. Okay, that's one thing. Okay, I got now how to localize that under C++ code. Well, that's pretty simple as well. You can always go back um, to whatever that string table is. You can always copy the reference for it. And under the code itself, let me just go back to the code. I have this UI words, which is like a constant that I stored with, and I just pasted the values inside of my constant. So that constant, I can just grab it whenever I need it. And when I want to specify under my code, because that's, remember, I create this into C++, that the whole UI is in C++. So whenever I need to set that value, I specify that. Oh, I actually need to remove that. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. Oops. Just unlink this. Leave it as clothing. Ooh, crap. I click on the wrong button. Cancel. Okay, so if I press T now, still is translated because I'm translating that under the C++ code, not that way. That was just an example. So as you can see now, even though I don't have translated here, it's still translated. Why is that? Because this value here, I set that through C++ code. And what do I do is I simply, whenever I'm creating the struct the UI, I am setting that value to the first one, which is weapons. But instead of setting the text like as a weapons, instead directly like ftext weapons, I grab that from a string table, and the string table is UI words. And the UI words, as I mentioned before, is just a reference to whatever that string table is stored into my game. And the key that I want to look for is the weapons one. So if I go again to my localization dashboard, open up for French, and I go to the completed one because that's already done, I have a key named weapons, and the translated is armas. And if I go for Portuguese, the same applies for Portuguese, Spanish, or whatever. I do have also the weapons here, and the values is armas. So that's how you can grab the values from C++ directly. Instead of you setting the values like manually and do a whole gigamarole or into how to work around on how to grab that data, you can always just grab the value from a string table. But let's suppose it can do this because your value needs to be concatenated. Maybe you're translating a dialogue, and in the middle of that dialogue, you're gonna have different keys, and you need to concatenate one string to another. Maybe like is a string key with a integer value on it or something like that. Like you picked up one item or something like that. You can always do this as well in C++. So let me just uncomment this one. And what this actually does is I create just a formatter called args, and then I added my weapon string into those arguments. And those arguments, the weapon string is nothing else but that value from the string table from that key. So this one is going to be translated, this weapon string. But let's suppose I want to specify like you have, I don't know, 6 weapons or something. So I add a different argument named value string or something like that. You can always change those to whatever you want to do it. And on that sense, I create from a string, which is generated by an integer. So it's converting inside of one of the on the top of the other. So I generate a text based on a string based on an integer, and the integer is 352. I can actually just say like you have 6 weapons or you have 1 weapon or whatever. But for the sake of simplicity, I'm gonna throw a random number here. And once you create those arguments, now you need to concatenate them into an actual string, which I call into an actual text, which I call description. So in the description, I create a variable called description, and that receives a format, which receives this macro called ns_loctext, which is basically doing the whole localization system for me. And I'm just creating a string somewhere into the environment called description UI. And the actual I'm creating the environment called description UI. The key itself for that environment is description string, and what that actually brings to me is the concatenation. The value of that key string is my weapon string argument 2 dots, because I want to concatenate. It could be like ABC or whatever, but I'm just separating that with this, and the value itself argument as well. And I pass then my argument, which is basically this one. So if everything goes right, once I play that again, what I'm gonna have is I'm gonna have it instead of that weapons string, I'm gonna have a weapons 2 dots and then the value 352. And the weapons is gonna be translated, but the number, since it doesn't need it, I'm not gonna translate it. So this way you can concatenate values and separate and build your own string, but still taking care of the whole localization system. There is also the loctext, but I haven't been able to do that. At least I haven't been able to work around with, because again, I haven't actually needed to do it so far to use the other one. This one is already working for me, so I'm okay with using it. But there's other macros as well, just the loctext, so you don't need to specify the environment or something. You can always just it's taking too long to compile. Oh, there we go. Now it's compiled. So once it launches, I can actually show you guys. There we go. Now I'm playing the game, and if I open my inventory, you can see that now the weapons word is translated, but the number isn't. And I have these 2 dots separating them. So I created a different string for it. I can always go back and change my culture to, I don't know, English US. That's going to be weapons 352. And if I change the culture, oops, the culture, no, the culture only to, I don't know, French, it changes again. So you can change that programmatic, but it's just to show that you can also concatenate strings without any, major issue. Let me not just delete this one because I actually don't need this one. And let me uncomment that one. So that's how to do it in C++. It's pretty simple. So whenever you need to grab from the string table, just grab it. And if you don't need to grab, just use that macro to and the arguments, the formatter to create your own formatted string as you need for. So pretty simple stuff in C++ as well. So as you can see now, whenever I click on weapons, I just grab the value from the string table with the key weapons. And if I go to the gears, I grab whatever the value is for the gears key, and etc. So the clothing and the potions as well. Okay, but is it possible to do that in other blueprints only? Yes, it is. So if you open up the character blueprint, I actually separated a few nodes there. So let me just open up the blueprint. There's a few nodes into the engine itself for blueprints, and you can actually later on specify the set culture node is basically to do whatever that I'm doing under the console command. So if I use, for example, let me just use keyboard U. Let me just use that U as a thing. So if I press U when playing the game now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change the culture to, I don't know, French. And if I play the game now with my character, if I press U instead of just typing the console command, that should change my language to French. So let me open up the thing, and if I press U, there we go. I'm in French, as you can see. So you can do that programmatically as well. So that there is a way of doing it. Also, you can grab all the localized cultures you actually support. So let's suppose you want, for some reason, you want to you want to see how many languages support or something like that. Maybe you want to unit test that or something. You can always grab the localized cultures that way. So it's going to return an array, and if I, for example, go a for each loop into that array, and I just print a string. So now if I play again and press U, what that's gonna do is for me is grab whatever is the culture that I support into my game. So if I press U again now, you can see that I support 4 different cultures into my game because it's printing Portuguese Brazil, French from France, Spanish Latin America, and English in general, not only English US, but just English. Um, and that's how you can grab those codes if you wanted to as well pass. You can always grab those codes. Let me just quit that one. You can always grab those codes from that node in order to feed this current node here. So you can always understand and feed that with a proper string. The native culture, on the other hand, let me just go back. And let me just print the native culture for my game. Actually, I think this one I can always, I need to be playing English. So if I play the native culture right now, that get native culture is grabbing me the, oh, I am actually inside of the for loop, sorry, but I forgot to remove the for loop. But as you can see, if I press U now, my native culture, even though I'm in Portuguese, my native culture of my game, it's written to support in English as a native culture. So if you want to grab that one for some reason, and you want to force then to use the native culture, well, you can do that and set this one as a native culture for the game. So if you do that, whenever I press U, it's going to change to English. For some reason, you may want to do that, but I don't know. You may want to do it, you may not want to do it, but it's up to you. I'm just showing that you can change that way. Um, the current culture, on the other hand, is the culture being used at that moment. So if I'm pressing play, and if I press U, you can see that I'm playing into Portuguese Brazil because my OS is in Portuguese Brazil. So it's grabbing whatever the Windows culture is at that point. So in my case, my Windows is in Portuguese again, so my current culture is Portuguese. So I can always go back and get the suitable culture here. And the array could be this one. And the culture I want to see if I support is this one. I can always fall back to to my native culture. So in that sense, I can do this. And I fall back this one. And this one could bring me a pretty powerful system here, which is basically grab the OS culture, see if I have that for my localized or my supportable cultures. If I don't have any of those cultures, which culture do I want to fall back in? Which is basically if I'm in Ukrainian, if I'm in Russian language or Japanese or something like that, and I don't support that, what's gonna be then the default value for all the failing ones? Well, then I can grab my native game culture and set this one this way. And this way, I can have a localized system, pretty much done, and grabbing whatever the suitable culture for my my player is, and set that for my UI. You can store that into a variable or something like that later. And the same way it's going to be applied. If you press D now and I press U, it's going to be Portuguese because my current culture is Portuguese because my OS is using Portuguese. But maybe that is not supported. Maybe is a Ukrainian version of English or something like that. And then you want to change that to a suitable or supportable language that you support in your game or something like that, you can do this Gigamaro to be sure that you're always going to be into a supported language for your game. So let's suppose you're translating still for a different language and you don't provide support yet. So you can always do that later on. And there are a lot more uh, cultures as well. So if you open up the internationalization nodes, there's a pretty uh, there's a lot of nodes here, like display name, the current locale and language. So locale would be um, Brazil in that sense, and language would be Portuguese or something like that. If you just want uh, the locale and not the the if you want just the French instead of the French from France, and you just want the FR, you can just grab the locale, or you can grab only the language or something like that. Okay, in blueprints and actually regarding UI strings, that's pretty much done. But you also could localize assets. So let's suppose you have like a UI for some reason that you have like a logo for one that is banned or something like that into a country and need to add a different logo just for that country in order to pass, some, you know, regular like regulatory issues through a country or something like that. Maybe your logo has like I don't know too much blood or something like that, and is not passing uh, the PEGI 18 or PEGI 10 or something like that. You specify your game to be PEGI 10, but you have too much blood, so it should be PEGI 18 for that country specific regulation. So you may want to change the logo just for that. So let's suppose you wanted to localize, for example, a logo or something like that. You can always go to asset localization, create localized asset, and specify one of the cultures for that specific asset. So if I want to change the logo, for example, for my text bone or something like that, let me just create one that I'm actually using. Let me just see if I can find potion. But where is the logo for my potion? Let me see. Let me see what is the logo for it. Well, let's suppose I want for Portuguese a different logo for Persian. So let's go to localize asset. Let's create a localized logo for Portuguese. What's it gonna do is gonna create this lion folder for you, and you don't need to change it. You can just download this one. So you can always go to asset, actions, export, and you can export that, I don't know, to your to your desktop. And you want to open like I don't know any third party software or like GIMP or Photoshop or something like that and edit that. I'm gonna do this real quick. So in that sense, what I did is I just opened that, like apply like a different color or something to it. So if I go now and re-import that and select there, there we go. Now I have a different potion for a different language. So if I save that one as it is, so if I play that one as it is right now in English, it's going to be showing my original one. But if I play that in Portuguese, which is basically my default language of my system, so if I play now and I pick it up my potion right there, let me just pick it up real quick. And if I go to the potion, as you can see now, it's blue because it's in Portuguese and the assets localized to, to a Portuguese version of it. So you can always create different assets as well with the localization system. And in that sense, you don't need to translate since it's an image. You can just, create localized assets for it. So if you want to create later on the same asset but different for a different language, just go to asset localization and specify each one of them for a specific country. If they're not localized, what it's going to do if I change for a different language, it's going to use it the default one, which is basically the original one. Just keep in mind though that whenever you're changing assets, you may need to reload uh, the asset in order to be localized. So if you're, for example, working on a level and the level is your main menu, in order to the main menu to be resetted, you may need to reopen your menu level or something like that. Or if you're using the asset manager on the Unreal Engine, which is a pretty powerful one, you can just unload the logo and reload it, and that should do the trick of updating the logo for or the logo or the asset for the proper localized one. And for those who like to do this whole Gigamoro into C++, this is a Kismet library, which is basically this uh, one, which is the EU Kismet internationalization library. So just keep in mind to import that library into C++ code, and while you're going to have all those nodes into C++. And if you want to see the whole post, this is the post that is written. So pretty simple. Those are going to be under the description below, as well as the Epic Games video of how to use the localization system and explaining to me way more detailed ways than I just did it. So, yep. Yeah, I forgot to mention as well that, as also mentioned into the live stream from the Epic Games, uh, you can also export. I mean, this whole UI can be used by small project like in the developers and etc. But as the project grows and you start to outsource translations for someone else to do or some other company to do, this UI may not be okay for them. So you can also export those um, key events or key files to a portable object file, which is basically the one that they import to their software for their translation software, the professional one. They do the whole translation there, and then they send back to you this portable object with translation in, and you can always import that based on the translations. But you need to go back under the localization dashboard, select the language, the edit, and then just import that file. To export that file with all the keys, without the translations for someone else to do it, you can always go back and just export that. So usually whenever you gather the text and our out is outsourcing that to a third-party company or something, you just gather the text, open up that, it's going to be empty. It's going to be lots of untranslated words. So you can just go back and export that to a page, to a portable object file, send back to the outsourced company, and they're going to send back to you with the translation in it, and then you can just always go back and re-import that into the translations again, and just compile if it works. So yeah, hope you like it.